It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be with you all today. As I mentioned, my name is Dylan George, and I'd love to tell you a little bit more about the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics. Now, I'm going to give you, if there's anything that you remember from my talk today, I want you to remember this byline right here. What we're trying to accomplish is better data, better analytics for a better response. We are dedicated to trying to improve our capabilities to actually respond to infectious diseases and public health emergencies in a concerted way. So that's the punchline of my whole talk. So if you don't remember anything else, that's it. Better data for better analytics for a better response. Now, to set the scene, I'd like to take you back to 1900. Galveston, Texas, down there on the Gulf Coast. It's a booming town at the time. There's lots of hope and prosperity going forward. About 40,000 people living there. They're really excited about the opportunities that are there in Galveston. It's going to potentially become the jewel of the South. Unfortunately, late that fall, the Galveston Weather Bureau starts receiving reports that there's a storm brewing. Unfortunately, the Weather Bureau wasn't able to actually pull together the information. They weren't able to actually analyze the information. They weren't able to actually put out warnings to the population that there was a storm coming. Unfortunately, what happened that day is a Category 4 hurricane made landfall right over Galveston. Of the 40,000 people that lived in Galveston at the time, somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people lost their lives that day. It was the worst hurricane in U.S. history in terms of loss of life. Over $1 billion in 2020 adjusted dollars were happened. Every building had some damage. Galveston never recovered. Economic activity went other places. Now, fast forward to today. We have capabilities as a nation to provide forecasting on severe weather. We have the National Weather Service. We have the National Hurricane Forecasting Service that provides advanced warning, early warning that saves lives. We can pre-position resources, we can evacuate people, we can hunker down, all of those things. That early warning saves lives. Now, don't get me wrong, hurricanes remain devastating. We don't have to look any further than this current hurricane season right now to look at what happened with Hurricane Ian. But early warning saves lives. We have those tools now. Now, why am I talking so much about hurricanes if we're going to be talking about infectious diseases? Well, unfortunately, we live in an era of pandemics. Before COVID, I used to have to convince people of that. I don't have to do that anymore. In fact, this year alone, we have COVID, monkeypox, and now Ebola in Uganda. All of them very concerning. And those are the major ones. There's lots of minor ones that are out there as well. Now, if we want, the challenge with living in the era of pandemics is these things happen at speed and scale. Now, what I mean by that is that outbreaks happen very quickly. They will impact many of us or many communities simultaneously. So reallocating resources or optimizing resources is going to be very challenging. If we want to have a much better response capability, we need to think differently. We need response capabilities that can similarly move at speed and at scale. One of the challenges that we saw in COVID-19, though, too, is that our data systems, in particular, can't operate at speed and scale very well. Part of that has to do with the CDC doesn't have the authority, actually, to mandate collection of particular information. Another part of that problem is that we don't have the data systems to actually make it easy for local jurisdictions to actually pass that information to the federal government in a simple way. So we need to think differently. Now, this is where the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics comes in as well. Last year, the Congress actually authorized, the administration mandated, and resources were put together and a team was brought together to actually stand up the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics. Now, I've already told you the punchline of what the remit of the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics already is. We are focused on better data, better analytics for a better response. We are focused on trying to improve the evidence base to guide more precision and effective outbreak response in a time of crisis. So that's the takeaway right there. Now this is a cartoon that I like to use to describe kind of the progression of an outbreak. You go from the viruses or pathogens circulating in various animal populations. They come over, they spill over to a human. They have an index case, and that could either create stuttering chains of transmission that either die out or create more clusters, more outbreaks, and it progresses to an epidemic or a pandemic and going forward. Now, the thing the reason that this cartoon is useful, though, too, for describing this is that we definitely know the blue box underneath is the toolbox of analytics that we are going to be creating at the Center for Forecasting Outbreak Analytics. And there's known information that we need at various stages of the outbreak. In the early part of the outbreak, we need to know, is something happening? Is there anomalous activity happening? Right after that, we need to know is how to characterize the risk of that particular outbreak. We need to know, how is it transmitting? How fast? To whom? Who's at risk? What is the clinical severity of that particular pathogen? Then we need to know, once we have that information, then we need to know, it's like, what is the range of different outbreak interventions that we could put into play, and how can we optimize them to actually have an effect of quelling that particular outbreak? Then we need to figure out, how do we actually anticipate the trajectory of the outbreak, given what we know about the risk and given what we know about the effectiveness of the particular interventions. These are different analytics across there. There's green boxes within that blue box underneath is the toolkit that exists right now to help do this. Now what CFA is going to do, we're going to make that a bigger toolbox. We're going to add more tools to that toolbox, and importantly, we're going to make it much more equitably distributed. We need to have this capability for all Americans and try to scale it in different ways. This is the last slide I'll give you here. This is what you can see here, this is a chart of numerical weather forecasting through time. So the x-axis is decades, the y-axis is some measure of forecasting skill for numerical weather forecasting for the weather. You see those blue and red lines are increasing monotonically through time. And really what you should take away from this is that back in the 50s, we were rubbish at forecasting the weather. We've progressively gotten much better at it. And why have we gotten better at it? We've gotten better at it because the government of the United States and other governments have invested in computational power, in data, in people, in different types of modeling capabilities, and they've sustained that funding through time. To the point that we all have mobile devices right now. We all check the weather. Before I came here, I decided it's like, well, I know what clothes I'm going to wear because I know it's not going to be raining. We know how to intuitively use that information to guide our individual decisions. Collectively, we use this information as well to guide how we move materiel and personnel all around the world. It impacts us in a lot of ways. Now, we have to come to the realization as well, in the early state where we are with disease forecasting, is we're probably back in the 70s or 80s. We need to get much better. Now, the reason I left the private sector to come back to work in the government was because I think we are at a transformative moment. We can see that we have the technology, we have the tools, we have the leadership, we have the money, and now we have a team that is building this capability. And honestly, it's one of the best teams I've ever worked with. I believe that we can push disease forecasting and outbreak analytics in a similar trajectory to what we see with numerical weather forecasting. And I'm confident that we'll be able to do this. And so I'm so excited about what we're building going forward because, as I said, with the Center for Forecasting Outbreak Analytics, we are going to build these capabilities to keep Americans safe. So it's for better data, better analytics, for a better response. Thank you very much.